Hi students, today we are talking about independent and dependent clauses. These are really critical to the next lesson where we talk about sentence fragments and run-ons. You have to be able to identify clauses as either dependent or independent to decide if a sentence is complete and correctly punctuated. So hopefully you have your note sheet. Go ahead and get it out if you don't, and let's learn about these clauses. Okay, so a little bit of a review if it's either been a long time since you've heard about this concept or maybe this is all new to you. So in our sentences, we have clauses. To be a clause, you have to have a subject and a predicate. And I've done a little bit of color coding for you here on this slide. We have subjects in blue and predicates in green. And clauses come in two types. You have either independent or dependent clauses. Independent clauses can stand alone and they're going to express a complete thought. So in this example, we ate an entire pizza. We is our subject, ate an entire pizza is our predicate. It's a complete thought, it's a grown-up sentence, it can stand alone. In a dependent clause, you cannot have a freestanding dependent clause. It can't stand by itself. And usually that happens because you have what's called a subordinating conjunction, also known as wubis words, which we'll get to in a minute. And those clauses feel incomplete. It's like the sentence just leaves you hanging. So a dependent clause has to be revised. And the way that you do that is either by removing that awubis word or adding another independent clause. So if you look at this sentence, because we ate an entire pizza, that is an incomplete thought. It's kind of like it's got a ... at the end of it and you're waiting for something else. Now if I just had we ate an entire pizza, that would be complete. I've got a subject, I've got a predicate, it can stand alone. But when I add this subordinating conjunction, suddenly I've got a problem. I've got a dependent clause that needs something to go with it. So that dependent clause we just looked at is called an awubis word, and they're wonderful for varying your writing, but you have to be careful because those take independent clauses and make them dependent. Those are words like although, after, as, when, while, until, before, because, if, and since. And yes, it really would be helpful if you would memorize those 10 words because you know when you have one of those words that you're probably going to have an independent clause. So let's look at a couple of examples. Although we were tired, comma, we still kept playing. All right, we were tired. By itself, this could be an independent clause. I've got a subject, we, and a predicate, were tired. But when I tack on this awubis word, this subordinating conjunction, suddenly I've got a dependent clause. I can't just say although we were tired because again we've got that ... It's not a finished thought. So that meant that I had to tack on an independent clause to help it out. Although we were tired, comma, we still kept playing. Okay, let's look at this one down here. Because I was late, the game didn't start on time. Now if I just had this part, I was late, that would have a subject and it would have a predicate and it could stand alone. But when I tack on this awubis word because, suddenly I've got a dependent clause now, because I was late. And again, that kind of has a ... effect, because I was late what? So that means that I have to add an independent clause to this dependent clause so that it sounds like this, because I was late, comma, the game didn't start on time. And it may sound kind of obvious as we're talking about it, looking at these sentences, but all students at some point end up with one of these kind of fragments where they just pop a period on after a dependent clause and then accidentally end up with a fragment in their writing. Okay, so a little memory trick here is to think about these awubis words like zombies. Kind of like if a zombie bites you, you become a zombie. Well, if you have an independent clause like we were tired that can stand alone, if this awubis word, although bites this independent clause, it makes it dependent. So just know that when you have the awubis monster going on in your sentence, that you've got a dependent clause, and that means you've got to make sure that it's connected to another independent clause to help it out. Okay, so why do we need to care about this? This is boring. Why does it matter? Well, 3 big reasons, all equally important. This is going to help us to avoid fragments when we know the difference between independent and dependent clauses. So because I was tired has one of those awubis words, that makes it a dependent clause, and it also makes it a sentence fragment. If I just say I was tired, that's okay. I've got a complete sentence there. So you need to know dependent clauses to recognize when you have a fragment. Also, if you're someone who's always struggled with comma placement, knowing independent and dependent clauses can help you figure out commas. So for example, if a dependent clause comes first in a sentence before an independent clause, I need to put a comma after the dependent clause. So here's an example. If you run, comma, the dog will chase you. If you run is dependent, it comes before an independent clause that can stand alone, so I need to put a comma there. You can also have an independent clause that is split up with a dependent clause in the middle. So let's look at this example. My teacher, who loves pizza, ate a calzone. If I just put my teacher ate a calzone together, that would be an independent clause. But I've got this dependent clause or a positive in the middle of it, which is fine, but I have to put commas around the dependent clause. Okay, and another comma help. Sometimes we put unnecessary commas in our writing. If you have an independent clause that comes before a dependent clause, then you don't need a comma. So let's look at this example. I will help you. That's an independent clause that can stand alone. Now if I just have because you asked nicely, that's a dependent clause. It can't stand alone. But it's okay because I've tacked it on to an independent clause to help it out. When the independent clause comes first, I don't need a comma. So that one is perfectly okay. Another reason that we need to know about clauses is because it can help us prevent run-ons. So if I have because you are so kind, comma, I will help you, I've got that dependent clause before the independent with a comma because you can link an independent and a dependent clause with just a comma. So that's okay, it's not a run-on, but you are so kind, comma, I will help you, period. This is a problem. I have an independent clause here and I have an independent clause here, and you cannot link 2 independent clauses with only a comma. You can only link a dependent and an independent clause with the comma. So to fix that, I would have to know that I have 2 independent clauses and that I need to add a fanboy in with this comma to fix the run-on. That's something that we'll go into more detail in our next lesson. Finally, knowing clauses helps you with sentence types. If your professor has ever asked you to vary your sentences, or you feel like your writing just doesn't have good rhythm, knowing how to vary your clauses and connect them correctly will help you to develop better, more rhythmic sentences. Most of the sentences that I have showed you in this video are complex sentences. That means you have an independent clause linked to a dependent clause, like in this example. And we don't want to just have simple sentence after simple sentence. Okay, so a little bit of practice here. If you would take out your guided notes and do this practice, first decide if these 5 pieces are independent or dependent clauses, and then go in and look at the punctuation on the 3 sentences that follow. Pause the video here, try this out on your own, and then I'm going to go through the answers with you in just a moment. Okay, hopefully you paused that video and we're going to go through the answers. So let's look at number 1. If you want my opinion, that has an awubis word, so it's going to be a dependent clause. If I just have you want my opinion, that would have been independent. But I've got an awubis word, so it makes it dependent. It's a fragment. 2, he told you not to. That's an independent clause. I've got a subject he and a predicate, and it can stand alone. It's a complete thought. All right, let's look at 3. Because I said so. I've got one of those AWUBIS words, and that bit this independent clause, I said so, and made it dependent. Okay, on 4, only the referee knows. That's independent. I've got a subject, I've got a predicate, it can stand by itself. And last but not least, I've got until the clock stops, another AWUBIS word, took this independent clause, the clock stops, and made it dependent. So that would be a fragment if I had it alone in a sentence. Okay, let's look at punctuation in the last part. Before we parked, comma, we paid the meter. Well, I've got a dependent clause here, before we parked, and it comes before an independent clause, we paid the meter, so I need a comma there. That's correct. Okay, let's look at 2. Brutus, comma, who is enthusiastic, comma, drank too much coffee. Now, if I had put Brutus drank too much coffee all together, then I've got an independent clause. But I've got this dependent clause in the middle of it, so I have to put commas around it, and when I do that, that makes the punctuation correct. And last but not least, I want you to study, because this is on the test, I want you to study is a complete independent clause. This is on the test is also an independent clause, and I've got this because going on here. So this because an AWUBIS word made this independent clause dependent, but because the independent clause comes before the dependent, I don't need a comma. I only need a comma when the dependent clause comes before an independent clause. All right, I hope you did well. If you're not feeling certain about this, if you're feeling a little shaky, remember that you have a few practice sets in the folder that have answers attached, and you can go in and do some more practice and then check your work and see how you do. And we'll talk more about these clauses in next week's lesson 2. See you in class.